There's someone rushing over there, but before starting our meeting today, I would like to express our solidarity with Spain. Our thoughts and hearts go out to all those affected by the devastating floods in Valencia, Albacete, and beyond, caused by the Dana storm. We stand in solidarity with their families who lost their loved ones, those who have seen their homes and communities impacted, and all the rescue teams working tirelessly to provide and support relief. Please know that you are not alone. Europe stands with you. And before we go on, I would like to inform you that today, for the sake of time management, I will be speaking in English, which will allow me to have a faster and clearer communication with our guest and with the members present today. Now, let me welcome the Commissioner-designate, Mr. Micallef, who's being entrusted by the President of the European Commission with the role of Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, Youth, Culture and Sport. I would also like to welcome the members of the Committee on Culture and Education, the Vice Chair of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, the Chair of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, and the Vice Chair of the Committee on Legal Affairs. In addition, I would like to welcome the Commission and Council colleagues who are also here today and those following us online, as this confirmation hearing is being streamed live and the video recording will be available afterwards on the EP website. In line with the EP rules for the approval of the European Commission, let me recall that after the confirmation hearing, the coordinators of the Committee on Culture and Education will need to evaluate the Commissioner-designate and state clearly whether he is qualified both to be a member of the College and to carry out the particular duties he has been assigned. Before today's hearing, Mr. Micallef has replied in writing to a preparatory questionnaire. The written answers have been distributed to members and are available online in all languages. The Committee on Legal Affairs assessed, on the basis of the documents presented, the question of potential or actual conflict of interest and has raised no objection to the holding of this confirmation hearing. Now let me recall the structure of the confirmation hearing. The Commissioner-designate is invited to make an opening oral statement for no longer than 15 minutes. At the end of the meeting, he will also have 5 minutes for a closing statement. After the introduction of Mr. Micallef, we will turn to the questions from our members. The confirmation hearing will be structured in 4 rounds. First round of political group coordinators with 5 minutes slots each, 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer of the candidate commissioner, with a possibility of a follow-up question from the same member, no longer than, again, 1 minute, and 1 minute for the reply. Second round of questions with 3 minute slots each, based on the overall distribution of speaking time among the political groups, including representatives from the non-attached members. Third round of questions by the chair and vice chairs of the invited committees with 3 minute slots each. And then a final round of questions by the political groups in reverse order, also with 3 minute slots each. Please note that all slots of 3 minutes will be divided in 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer from the Commissioner-designate. At the end, I will conclude the confirmation hearing. Interpretation today will be provided in 23 languages. All speakers can therefore use their own language. Speakers are to be reminded that what they say will need to be interpreted, so please keep in mind that you speak not too quickly. I would like to make it clear that I will need to be very, very strict with the time, because as we run late, some members will not be able to take the floor. Therefore, if you exceed the time that has been allocated to you, I will need to use the hammer. And as a last resort, I will also mute you, which is not a very pleasant thing to do. Before I give the floor to Mr. Micallef, I would like to say that the next 5 years will be of strategic importance for the European Union project. From our perspective, in addition to supporting culture and the cultural aspects of the European Union, sports, youth, youth mainstreaming, youth engagement, and active citizenship will be key to addressing challenges related to the lack of young people's participation in democratic processes, as well as preventing youth polarization and also political disillusion. Linked to the future work on these policy areas, I acknowledge your responses to the horizontal written questions and your readiness to cooperate with the European Parliament. This is particularly important in the context of the revision of the framework agreement between Parliament and Commission, in particular regarding your engagement to be regularly present in the Committee on Culture and Education and in plenary debates on the topics of your portfolio. The follow-up of Parliament's legislative initiatives and the sharing of information in a timely manner with the Parliament as a co-legislator and arm of the budgetary authority will be key. We count on the full implementation of these commitments and emphasize the Commission's role as an honest broker in all legislative procedures and in the institutional negotiations, ensuring equal treatment of Parliament and the Council. I equally count on your full cooperation to also inform the Committee on Culture and Education in advance of all upcoming proposals, including those ones related to the EU programs under your portfolio, and provide us with detailed justifications for those requiring urgent actions. This will ensure the transparency and allow Parliament to exercise its prerogatives properly. I'm sure that our exchanges will be very fruitful today. Dear Mr. Micallef, you now have the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, Honourable Members. It was here, at this very institution, where I had the privilege of beginning my European journey as an intern. It may be a twist of fate, but it is most of all an honour and a privilege to be here before you, seeking your approval as a member of the European Commission, responsible for intergenerational fairness, youth, culture, and sport. My personal commitment embodies this portfolio. As I wrote in my replies to your questions, I engaged in participatory democracy from a very young age. I have played an active role in youth, sport, and cultural organizations at the local, national, and international levels. Honourable members, diversity, fairness, and solidarity. These have always been the cornerstones of the European project. These values are enshrined in our treaties. If confirmed, these European values will play a vital role in my work as European Commissioner. We stand with the brave people of Ukraine. The brave people of Ukraine who are defending not only their land, but also our common values. We will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And I will assess where we can strengthen our collaboration within the scope of my portfolio with Ukraine and with other candidate countries. I clearly remember the optimism and the excitement when Malta joined the European Union 20 years ago. I was there at the celebrations at the Grand Harbour. I was one of those young people whose life was transformed by EU membership. I had the opportunity to live the European dream. Yes, enlargement is a merit-based process. Yet I firmly believe we have a collective responsibility to work hard together so that many more people can live their own European dream. I'm honoured to be nominated the first ever European Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness. Intergenerational fairness is one of the most important societal challenges we have today. We must not leave any generation behind. But we also need to take into account the needs of future generations in all actions that we take. Honourable members, we have a collective responsibility to ensure holistic and long-term responses. If confirmed, I will put forward the first ever strategy on intergenerational fairness. I will cooperate with all members of this Parliament and of this committee, as well as of College, to ensure that the voices of all generations are listened to and that their views are acted upon. And I will ensure that all the possible tools offered by Foresight will be used to promote intergenerational fairness. If confirmed, I will also integrate an intergenerational fairness dimension in all areas under my responsibility, starting with the youth. Young people are underrepresented in politics, and they are less likely to vote. This can lead to policies that disregard their interests and concerns. This is why it is essential, it's essential to engage youth, to ensure for fair political participation and representation. This is essential for the youth, but it is also essential for our democracy. Democracy is a value upon which our union is founded, and our democracy is under threat. We can only protect our democracy with the youth on board. Without the youth, the future of the European project already lies in the past. That is also why young people must be enabled to have their say on the future. As one of you told me, we must make politics with young people, not for young people. As Commissioner for Youth, I understand my role as next generation's advocate in the European Commission. If confirmed, I will work tirelessly to give them a seat around the table and to include them in all the decisions that affect their future. To this end, I will also support the members of the Future College in organising youth policy dialogues. This will send a strong signal to youth that their interests are at the core of our work. Alongside this, I will assist the President in setting up the Youth Advisory Body. In this work, I will pledge to ensure the representation of youth across the EU's member states and communities. Building on the legacy of the European Year of Youth and of the Conference on the Future of Europe, these actions will be complemented by a youth check. I intend to use this as a key tool to empower young people, enabling them to drive change and shape the future. Intergenerational fairness and solidarity start with the youngest members of our society, children. Children bear no responsibilities in shaping the world that they inherit. They only have rights: the right to safety, the right to education, and the right to a future filled with hope and opportunity. It is our collective duty to combat child poverty with all the tools at our disposal. Implementing the EU strategy on the rights of the child is a responsibility that I take with utmost seriousness. I am going to work to make it a reality across all the corners of our union. No child, I repeat, no child must be left behind. One of our greatest challenges is protecting the mental health of our children and our young people, especially online. If confirmed, I will lead the work on an action plan against cyberbullying, working closely with other members of the College to embrace issues including education, digitalization, security, and combating hate speech, as well as ensuring equality and health. Honourable members, solidarity also means uniting our creativity and our political will to tackle shared challenges. I am convinced by the power of culture, with its rich, diverse tapestry, and sport to unite and connect, but also to inspire people. Art, music, and cinema bring joy to Europeans and encourage reflection and interaction across geographic and linguistic borders. One of you told me some days ago, culture and cultural heritage are the cement that shape and foster our common European sense of belonging. I remember when Valletta was inaugurated as the European Capital of Culture a few years back. I want to continue to show Europeans that EU support helps to showcase culture, foster sustainable urban development, and promote European identity. Culture and the creative sector also have a huge potential for our economy. Yet much of this potential seems to be currently going untapped. We need a more strategic approach to the Commission's work in this field. If confirmed, I will deliver a new strategic framework, a culture compass, that will harness and connect culture's multiple dimensions with the Commission's broader political priorities. From my meetings with you, I know that you have excellent ideas of what should be included in the culture compass. If confirmed, I will work very closely with you to deliver a holistic strategy, a strategic framework that will be a game changer in the sector. This is essential to tackle common challenges, such as protecting Europe's diverse cultural heritage from climate change, creating real value added through culture in our regions, and ensuring that culture benefits from new digital technologies like AI. AI brings unique opportunities, offering tools to complement artists' skills and unlock new forms of expression. It can help to reach wider audiences and boost innovation. But we also know about the challenges and the risks related to AI. Change can be difficult to embrace. Still, by harnessing its potential and mitigating the risks, we can empower artists and strengthen Europe's cultural leadership in the digital age. If confirmed, I will formulate an AI strategy for the cultural and creative industries, together with the Executive Vice President for Tech Sovereignty, Security, and Democracy. These initiatives will form part of my broader efforts to build on the work of the current Commission and the Parliament to improve the working conditions of Europe's artists and cultural professionals. It was so beautiful to see the European flag fly at the Paris Olympics last summer. It filled us with a sense of pride. It was a reminder of the power of sport to bring people together, to foster cohesion in our society. As a former vice president and a former player of a local football club, I have first-hand experience of the importance of solid governance, fairness, and integrity, but also of the financial solidarity and support that's needed at the grassroots level. I will dedicate all my energy to preserve and promote our European sport model and the shared values of fairness, tolerance, and equality that it embodies. The European sport model is fundamental to promote our common values within and beyond our union. If confirmed, I will use the full power of sport and cultural diplomacy to promote peace and foster people-to-people dialogue. But my efforts will not stop there. Sport is essential to tackling the epidemic of inactivity and obesity in Europe, and to reducing the risk of non-communicable diseases and mental health problems. Yet, up to 45% of Europeans never exercise. 45% of Europeans never do sport. To increase Europeans' participation in sport, I will propose a review of the Council recommendation on health-enhancing physical activity. I will support the Member States in encouraging Europeans to move and to enjoy sports benefits for their physical and mental health. Before I turn to your questions, let me say a few words about EU funds and programs. Erasmus+, including Discover EU, Creative Europe and the European Solidarity Corps, not only support our policy making, but also empower millions of people, regardless of their age, to gain new experiences and strengthen their skills. This enables them to engage in communities and actively contribute to shaping our future in the Union. We all know that in a few months, we will need to discuss the future of these funds and programs. Together with you, honourable members, and my colleagues in college, I will be focusing on identifying what should be financed and subsequently how best to finance it. We have to ensure that EU funding has a real impact on the ground and is simple enough to allow all beneficiaries to gain from it. Honourable members, I am eager to work with you to strengthen our union. Together, we can bring tangible benefit to Europe's people and its regions. Together, we have what it takes to tackle the challenges that lie ahead of us. And together, honourable members, we can reinforce our shared values, the values that we hold dear, values on which this European house is built: diversity, fairness, solidarity, and democracy. I ask for your trust to allow me to take forward the Commission's work on intergenerational fairness, youth, culture, and sport, to realise our shared vision together. I now look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now start the first round of questions, and I will give the floor to the coordinators, starting with the EPP. Mr. Tar, you have 1 minute.
Much. Welcome, Mr. Micallef, to the hearing on behalf of EPP colleagues. I have two questions. One is a broader one. The second one is more concrete. The first one, recognizing the challenges posed by the rising nationalism and populism, what proactive steps do you envision taking to promote the values of cultural diversity and solidarity across the European community? And the second question is, since youth will be a large part of your portfolio, we would like to know how you will make sure that the new bodies announced in your mission letter, including youth dialogues, a youth stakeholder group, and the youth advisory board, will have a real impact on youth policy making. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Micallef?
A union that has active youth is a union that is fit for the future. We need to concretely give youths greater freedom and greater responsibilities in our societies and democracy. And through the implementation of the youth check in particular, we will gather the views of young people and factor them in our decision making. We will do this systematically, thereby having a youth perspective in the design and the preparation of all our legislation. And we will complement this, I will complement this with the youth dialogues, through which we will also gather the views of young people, and the President's Youth Advisory Body. These will all be concrete measures, and if I can elaborate a bit on the youth check, as from next year, all the proposals and all the initiatives that will be in the first annex of the Commission work programme will be assessed for their impact on youth. If a proposal is deemed to be relevant, then we will have youth-specific impact assessments that will practically show us where we need to focus our attention. And we will also consider having youth-specific consultations should the need arise. In terms of culture, we will have a culture compass that will be a game changer for the sector, that will guide and harness the multiple dimensions of culture in the EU policy making for the next mandate and beyond.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up question, Mr. Tar?
How do you envisage your work with the other commissioners relevant to the youth portfolio? As we all know, this new commission is really required to work together, and your portfolio is really connected to Vice President-designate Minzatu in charge of Erasmus Plus and education. What possible synergies do you see between your portfolios? Thank you.
Mr. Micallef?
I believe that all policy areas are interlinked. There is not one that is independent from the other. In the next Commission, it will be imperative that we collaborate and we coordinate all our efforts. When it comes to youth, for example, I will need to work very closely with the designated Vice President responsible for people and skills on the Erasmus program. She will be handling the broader parts of the program as well as the formal education parts, and I will be responsible for the informal and non-formal learning components, the youth and sport components, but this extends also to other members of the Commission. I will need to work closely with colleagues on issues like health, for example. We know that mental health is a challenge that is particularly present in our youth, and so it's going to be absolutely imperative in the next mandate that we work as one Commission, as one team, with this committee, with the Parliament, and with the Member States as Team Europe.
I give the floor to Mr. Haider from the S&D.
Designierter Commissioner Designate. Commissioner Designate, the European Parliament in the past legislature took an important initiative report on the social framework for artists and the creative sectors that we adopted. That should set a framework for common standards for working conditions for artists across Europe, and to make sure that the younger generation of artists can be integrated in the single market. My question then is, how do you intend to implement this own initiative report? Which legal tools do you intend on putting forward, and do you see a concrete timetable for the implementation of this, and how do you consider to work with the other designated commissioners designate on this?
I believe that artists should be able to focus on being creative on their job and should not have to worry about earning a decent living. I know that the sector has been facing a great many challenges, starting with atypical working conditions, seasonality, but also poor working conditions that affect the sector's ability to attract and retain talent, but also affects the sector's competitiveness. And before we go any further, we have to understand that this is a sector that is significant for our union. There are 7.7 million people working in this sector. 46% of them report that they face poor working conditions, and 68% of them have to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. They have to work 2 jobs to be able to cover their expenses. I am very much aware of the resolution in Parliament and the initiatives taken by Parliament, and this is a priority on which there has been already a process that started consultations in Member States, so we understand the situation and assess the situation a bit better. In the first months of my mandate as Commissioner, based on these consultations, I will organize a high-level roundtable, bringing together social partners, stakeholders, industry, as well as members of this Parliament, of this committee, to assess the remaining legislative gaps, to better support our exchange, and then to chart our future, our initiatives, our action in the future together. We will also organize annual thematic workshops with member states to keep the topic high on the political agenda. And before we have our assessment, we cannot exclude the need either for policy or legislative action.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question, Mr. Heide?
This own initiative report includes an important instrument for a more efficient implementation of social conditionality. That means EU finance projects in the creative sectors, such as in Creative Europe, have to meet a number of requisites for working conditions. How can you ensure that the European Commission will make sure that this conditionality is included in the next round of those legislative elements covering the creative sector?
The first priority in the first months of the mandate will be to organize this high-level roundtable where we will assess the regulatory gaps that require further framework. As I was mentioning in my earlier answer, we will complement that with an annual thematic conference with member states where we will keep the topic high on the agenda, but we will also consider reinforcing the social conditionalities in the next cycle of union programs, which will enable more assistance, more investments to improve the working conditions of artists in the European Union. This is a priority when it comes to our work in the cultural sector. We have to see how union financing in the next mandate can be more strategic and more impactful to improve the working conditions of artists and to boost the competitiveness of our cultural and creative sector industries.
Mrs. Grisé from the PFE.
Thank you. Well, at the start of your intervention, you did mention this, but I wanted to check that if you're confirmed, you're going to respect all components of this Parliament. I don't want to see any anti-democratic firewalls in place. That's my first question. Now, second question, 8th of September 2020, the ECJ forced member states to pay rights to creators, but there's no reciprocity, particularly from the United States. So, and we don't want to pay out rights without our artists receiving rights in return. Now, this is important because these rights are being paid at the moment and they finance festivals and other cultural events. In addition, this case law, risks being extended to music that is created by AI. And this might also come from third countries. The microphone is switched off.
I believe in dialogue. I believe in communication. But at the same time, in the same vein, we are a union that is guided by values that are in our treaties, values that are the compass to our action, and that we have championed and mainstreamed across all our legislation and our policies. As a Commission and as Commissioner, I will ensure that we speak up and we stand up to protect our values, and that we do so using all the tools and all the means at our disposal. When it comes to copyrights and initiatives that protect our cultural sector in this respect, I am very much aware of the initiative that was brought forward in Parliament in the previous mandate to protect copyrights of live music events. And this is very much a priority. As you know, we have a recommendation as a result of that initiative, through which we will assess the effectiveness of the tools that we have at our disposal. And if need be, there will be follow-up actions and actions that will support this in this mandate as well.
Mrs. Grisé.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Designate, for that answer. Now, this is an important subject for the funding of our cultural sector, and it's also an issue that relates to fairness and justice, because without this reciprocity we can't fund our cultural sector and that of the third countries. I mean, it's quite surprising that the ECJ has left us with this problem without providing any alternatives. So I'd like to know by when you'll be able to act, when will you be able to come up with a proposal? And then a further question, do you think you can get member states on board? Thank you, Commissioner Designate.
I believe we'll have to be more strategic, more impactful, and more ambitious when it comes to culture. I will lead the work on a culture compass that will focus on three strands. First, protecting our culture and cultural heritage. Secondly, better the cohesion of our regions. And third, and the very important point, is to boost the competitiveness and innovation in the culture sector. Right now, we have actions in our cultural sphere that are fragmented across a number of policy areas. Culture features now in 20 policy areas and 20 funding instruments. So one way that we will make sure that we are more effective in boosting that competitiveness is through coordinated action, a vision, a strategy with means, with objectives, and with monitoring tools, so that we can ensure that our sector is properly managed to deliver on our common objectives.
Mrs. Magoni from the ECR.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Designate, in a time in which Europe is threatened on many fronts, we take the view that we must tap into our history, identity and shared culture. So I'd like to draw your attention to the issue of European cultural heritage. European heritage is the cornerstone of modern-day Europe. This is a sign of civilization and the Europe we know today. This symbolises our values, history, and so forth in Europe. Cultural heritage sites are selected for their importance in European history, and they are they fall under Creative Europe as well as the Council of Europe itineraries and routes. These are items of heritage to be tapped into. So I wonder if you and the Commission intend to work further on this and how you intend to go about it.
We have a rich and diverse cultural tapestry in the European Union. We have probably one of our greatest assets that lies in our culture. This is something that in periods marked by geopolitical tensions, marked by conflict, marked by climate change and technological disruptions, that gives our citizens a sense of belonging to their societies, that makes them feel like they are part of society. Our culture compass, the work that I will lead on the culture compass, will be focusing on how we could have better cohesion in our regions, how we can protect and safeguard our cultural heritage and our culture, including our linguistic diversities, and how we can boost the competitiveness of our creative and culture sectors. Now, this will be our general reference framework through which we promote culture in other policy areas, but it will be also the main reference framework through which we take forward our work in the cultural sector to improve the working conditions of artists, to develop a strategy on how we deal with AI in the creative and cultural sector, to provide guidance on cost-effective measures to improve the quality of life in our member states, and to promote the role of culture in our regions. This is one of the key remits that we have in our treaties, because our treaties give us two roles. One, to support member states in ensuring that their cultural sectors flourish, and the second, to coordinate the positions on issues where we have common challenges.
Do you have a follow-up question, Mrs. Magoni?
Grazie.
Thanks very much. Sport isn't just competition, it's a universal tool to deal with issues of inclusion and integration. As I see it, an inclusion policy should never be overburdened with ideology. In your Q&A, you mentioned a recent positive experience of the Paris Olympics, but let's not neglect the controversy about the opening ceremony, in which the spectacle overshadowed the athletes time and again. Should we not work towards gender equality, observing at the same time due balance between that and the competition in which people, including transgender people, take part in? What about the autonomy of sports people? Here, Europe should reach out to the international sports federations and raise their awareness of how to apply standard protocols without any discrimination, ensuring that competition is balanced. Do you intend to support a duly balanced approach based on scientific evidence, seeing to it that the principles of inclusion and non-discrimination are fully dealt with?
Look, there can be no compromises on fairness in sport, but at the same time, we are a union of equality. This is a union that promotes inclusion and diversity, and we have championed these values, mainstreaming them into our policies and our legislation. Now, my role as Commissioner and my emphasis will be to promote a values-based European sport model. I will encourage everyone to be active, to practice sport, because this improves their quality of life and their well-being. At the same time, the European model of sport, the distinct European model of sport, is based on the autonomy of sporting organizations to govern their sport in the way that, without undue external influence. So it will be up to them, according to the guidelines also that are being provided by the IOC, to decide on such matters.
I give the floor to Ms. Fareng from the Renew Group. Pardon.
Commissioner Designate, in 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt launched the New Deal with an important aspect, and the US economy was suffering, and democracy was actually being questioned, and this is happening in Europe. We value culture, and in Franklin D. Roosevelt's relaunch program, he wanted to start something for decades to come. It's difficult not to draw parallel with the European Union in 2024. Our cultural sovereignty is being called into question economically because of technological aspects of the big companies like GAFA, and also culturally we're being brought into question because of the illiberal democracies outside the EU, but also within the EU. Nevertheless, our cultural ecosystem is only getting a very small share of the budget. Commissioner Designate, it's high time for a new cultural deal for Europe to help out. Speaker's cut off.
Look, I truly believe that we need to be ambitious, strategic, and impactful when it comes to culture. Now, I want to first start by thanking this committee, thanking this Parliament for being so vocal and a great ally to cultural and creative professionals, especially when it came to the budget of Creative Europe, which, thanks to the pressures from the co-legislators, is now 65% higher than it was in the previous cycle, in the previous MFF. This is a discussion that we will have in 2026. I want a strategy, a culture compass that has objectives, that is complemented by means, and that is complemented by monitoring tools, so we can assess the progress that we have. In 2026, we will start the discussion on the new MFF. We will need to see what we want to finance and then how best to finance it. I will work hand in hand with the designated Vice President responsible for people and skills, as well as with the designated Commissioner responsible for the budget, to ensure that we are strategic in our financing, that we improve the working conditions of artists and creative professionals in the next budget, as well as to boost the competitiveness of the culture and creative sector industries. These are going to be crucial if we want to deliver on our goals, and through a strong budget, we can do so.
Mrs. Farrein?
Justement sur...
Well, yes, on this very point, many of the cultural industries today fall under DG Connect, audiovisual, musical streaming, video games. So you're talking about financing and you're talking about your cultural compass. So I'd like to know if your cultural compass will take into consideration these industries, which at the moment fall under a different portfolio, under a different Directorate General to the one that you'll be leading if you're put in office.
The work on the culture compass will have two strands in the way I view it. First, to ensure that we reach the potential of the culture sector itself. And then the second strand is to promote the role of culture in our policy areas, both internal and external, because we have a cultural diplomacy element that we have to take into account in our funding instruments and in our program and in all our legislation. We will have to be very coordinated in the next Commission, and I will make it a point that I work with colleagues who are covering digital, colleagues who are working on health in the next Commission, colleagues who are working on regions to promote the role of culture in delivering on our objectives in the European Union through their work as well.
Mrs. Goderi from the Green Group.
When it comes to culture, the EU is tasked with several important responsibilities, including the protection and promotion of cultural and linguistic diversity. These are closely linked to freedom of creation and expression, which, as you recognize, are fundamental pillars of democratic societies. The reality is that freedom of artistic expression and the safeguarding of linguistic diversity in Europe face growing threats. Certain illiberal and anti-democratic political parties and movements view culture and multilingualism as challenges to their agendas. In this context of increasing instrumentalization of culture, restriction on artistic freedom, politicized funding as a mechanism of pressure, and even censorship of cultural institutions, our question is, in your opinion, how will the EU cultural policy and promotion of multilingualism coexist with these national policies? And taking into account the principle of subsidiarity, how do you intend to address the growing limitation on artistic freedom in the Member States?
Li din hija mistoqsija dwar il-multilingualizmu, nixtieq nuża
A question about multilingualism. I would like to use my language. I think that language is one of the best expression of our identity in our societies, and I believe that one of the main pillars upon which we build culture is the preservation of our cultural and historical heritage that includes linguistic diversity. In the past few years, because of various investment thanks to Creative Europe, we were able to promote, for instance, the translation of various literature publications. Thanks to Erasmus+, we promoted learning languages. And if one looks at the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, this includes clear rules on the content on digital platforms and that it should be available in different languages. In the next months, we will start the discussions on the budget. And during these discussions, we will see that these investments need to be given priority to continue promoting linguistic diversity. We know that in the European Union, there are around 50 million people that speak either regional languages or minority languages. And as you very well said, linguistic diversity is of national competence, so we have to work with member states and their governments. With regard to the freedom of expression and artistic expression, I feel that the Commission has the obligation to preserve and protect this value. We have the tools in our hands, and if we need to make sure that we are actually guaranteeing the protection.
Thank you. So, can you commit to advancing concrete measures to protect the freedom of expression and artistic creation? And will you commit to ensure that aspects of artistic freedom of expression are actually included in the annual report on the rule of law, for example?
These are values that, for us, are very dear. They are right up there in the second article of our treaties of the European Union. We have a duty and an obligation to safeguard them, to mainstream them in all our actions, in all our programs, in Erasmus, to mention one, in Creative Europe, but also with other colleagues within the Commission. I will do my best to work with them to ensure that we deliver, we ensure that they are safeguarded and that there are no compromises on these values.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Papas from the left.
Αγαπητέ κύριε Μικάλεφ, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι.
Mr. Micallef, colleagues, first of all, I'd like to express my satisfaction because I see a young man, a young politician, who is a candidate for this portfolio, a man of my generation. I read very carefully your replies to our written questions, but I'm interested in sport, especially in as a tool of social integration for young people, but all generations. So I have a question on this theme. You talked about the European sports model. And for me, this is not very well defined. What are the main characteristics that describe the European sports model, and how do they contribute to the promotion of social integration by comparison to other models internationally? How will you secure the sustainability and equality in sports development in all member states in order to reinforce what you call European sports model? And finally, no microphone. Thank you.
Sports has a power to reach places where politicians cannot. It has a fundamental educational, social, as well as a political role. In Europe, we have what we call as a distinct European sport model. It's one that recognizes the autonomy of sporting organizations to govern their sports in the way that they deem fit. That recognizes the value of sporting merit, that is based on a system of promotion and relegation, an open system of promotion and relegation. But then there are the final two components, which are really key in this discussion. The redistribution and the solidarity between elite sport and the grassroots sport, as well as the role of volunteers. This European sport model that I envisage is one that is values-based. It is one that stands up for human and social rights. We have the chance through our work on a stronger European sport model to make it clearer to the sporting movement that we expect more from them, to integrate people from different backgrounds in sport. The beauty of sport is that it knows no background, it knows no gender, it knows no identity, it knows no rich or poor. Sport is for everyone, and it should be our mission to make it available to everyone and anyone, and that it respects people for who they are, whoever they are.
Mr. Papas? In what you've described as a European sports model, what specific strategies and actions will you undertake to promote sports and physical activity for vulnerable groups such as people with disabilities or migrants, ex-drug users or delinquent youth, to ensure social integration, accessibility of these groups to sports activities for all at local, national and European level? From what funds could all these actions be funded? Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this up. As I said, to me, sports is a powerful tool to connect people. We have to work with the member states in this sphere. I really look forward to having a health-enhancing physical activity recommendation that encourages member states to include in their national action plans measures such as what you described, to integrate into our societies people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. But then we have important discussions in the context of the next MFF that are coming up on key tools like, for example, the European Solidarity Corps, that can be used as a tool to engage with young people who want to work with through sport to include social integration in our societies. These are discussions that we will have next year in the context of the new MFF, and I will work with the designated Vice President as well as the designated Commissioner for Budget to ensure that these priorities are adequately financed.
Now I give the floor to Mr. Jongen from the ESN.
Vielen Dank, Herr.
Thank you, Mr. Micallef, on behalf of the ESN Group. Freedom of science is one of the most important foundations for the success of Europe, as important for the development of our youth. Our educational institutions have been undermined by gender studies and post-colonial studies and other nonsense. In German universities, there are as many chairs for gender studies as for pharmacy and philology. Nonconformist academics must have had to form a kind of union to stand up against vocal ideologists. The EU is using Erasmus+, unfortunately, to act against the interests of science and against the interests of youth. In Spain, 14 to 18-year-olds are trained to be drag queens and are indoctrinated with dangerous ideology. Will you slam the brakes on such ideological projects? How will you see to it?
When I see Erasmus, I see a flagship program of our union, a program that has given us a family of 15 million European citizens, 15 million young people who are champions of the Union. And this is a program that will be strengthened and that we will work to have more resources attributed to it. Now, I had the opportunity in one of my earlier answers to make it amply clear how I will work for a values-based union. Our values, equality, solidarity, democracy, and freedom for one to express themselves are non-negotiable. They are in our treaties, but we have championed them in our strategies, in our policies, and in our funding instruments. And we will make sure that we will continue to respect them and that our funding instruments continue to champion them as well. This is something for me that is of utmost priority, and I will make it a point to make sure that these are respected. We have tools at our disposal. We will assess every case, be it on Erasmus as well as on other programs, when there are risks to such programs, but we will not compromise on our values.
Mr. Jongen?
Keine ganz befriedigende oder klare Antwort, aber Sie haben völlig zu Recht.
That was not a satisfactory or clear response. The importance of Erasmus Plus was stressed by you, and we also warmly embrace this programme. The EU has helped a lot of young people to educational success. Some EU countries have been dropped from this programme without due reasons. In December 2020, the EU withdrew funds from Erasmus for 21 Hungarian universities, allegedly due to the structure of the foundations within these universities. The Hungarian government dropped these foundations, but the funds have still remained blocked. The Commission was clearly looking for a pretext here, punishing the Orban administration for its migration policy or whatever. Can you clear up this suspicion for us and reincorporate the Hungarian universities?
When we speak about the rule of law, it is amply clear that we will continue to invest in the rule of law. We will continue to ensure that this remains a priority for our union. We have done so in the previous mandate, where the Commission has delivered mechanisms, such as the rule of law mechanism, that safeguard this value which we hold so dear, but also a conditionality regulation that makes EU funds conditional upon the respect of the rule of law. Now, there's been a process with one member state that you have mentioned. This does not apply to all Hungarian universities. There are a number where there is an issue with the ownership structure. The ball is in the Hungarian government's court to prove that the risks that were highlighted are not there anymore, and once that is proven, then the Commission will make a proposal. My colleagues and colleagues will make a proposal for the release of those funds.
Thank you all very much. We will now start the second round of questions, and I will give the floor to Mr. Strojewski, EPP member, and I may remind you that you have 1 minute for your questions and 2 minutes for the answer.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In order to govern well, you need good information. You need knowledge, so you need to also know how to govern. I mean the methodology. And yes, it was done a lot recently about the methodology of governance. We know how people are employed in the cultural sector, how much they earn, mostly not enough, but we do not know everything. We do have information gaps. And this knowledge also goes very quickly sort of out of date. So how can you guarantee that the information that we have about our creative sectors is up to date and that we can work on a policy that is really well adapted to those people? And one more question, are you satisfied with your portfolio? Because there is no education, no media, it is just about culture and sport. Is it enough for you?
My portfolio gives me a platform to work with many colleagues in the Commission, and I can assure you that I am thrilled about it. Now, when it comes to the cultural sector and your question, through our work in the Culture Compass, the first steps that we will take will be to update the framework of cultural statistics, to be able to have informed discussions that will be able to allow us to have evidence-based actions in our work. This will be complemented by a Eurobarometer survey, where we assess the perceptions of and the information that we are given from our people in on the cultural sector. But when it comes to the working conditions of artists, there is an assessment which is currently ongoing on the situation in various member states, because there are actions that are being taken at national levels where we have statuses on the rights of the artists in some member states, whereas in others you have also legislation. That assessment will inform our discussion. It will enable us to assess whether there are regulatory and legislative gaps, also considering that there is a body of employment and social legislation that is already applicable. And if there are gaps, we will ensure that there are the adequate follow-ups, either from a policy or legislative point of view, to address them.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Repp from the S&D.
Micallef, vorhin sprachen Sie...
Mr. Micallef, previously you were talking about mental health of young people. As I'm sure you know, the corona pandemic had a massive impact on the mental health of young people. The levels of depression and anxiety compared with pre-COVID times have more than doubled. More than half of the young people are saying that their psychological health issues are not being met sufficiently. Can you explain how you intend to help the mental health of young people and to have it firmly established on the European agenda? Is there an intention to allow young people on board to help decide on these issues that affect them personally?
There is no greater priority for us than the health and the well-being of our citizens. When it comes to young people, I know that there are 1 in 2 young people right now in our union that are suffering from anxiousness, loneliness, other forms of mental health challenges. And for us, these continue to be priorities. Now, my portfolio gives me the responsibility and the role to be able to address these challenges through culture and through sport. When it comes to sport, there is no doubt about the power of sport to help people better their quality of life. And indeed, in our work on the health-enhancing physical activity recommendation, this will definitely be one of the priority areas where we will need to work with member states so that their action plans have concrete measures to help these target groups. But culture also plays a very important role. Since 2010, the World Health Organization has been reviewing the contributions of arts and culture to our well-being, to prevent, detect, and even to treat disease. And we have seen in many of our member states programs where through music therapy, people are being assisted in various conditions, where we have culture for prescription programs, culture as a prescription. This is an area where there is already an expert group between the member states that is assessing what we have so far, to be able to have peer learning exercises, to see what best practices are being implemented and roll them out across member states. And these are actions that I will support. We will have an outreach campaign on these issues. We will have measures to promote culture for prescription. And this is a topic that I hold very dear and that I want to devote a lot of my energy to.
Mrs. Glavak from the EPP.
Yes, thank you very much. Dobrodošli u...
Welcome to the European Parliament. Take into consideration the double role of sport in promoting social inclusion and public health. How do you plan to use sport to support social cohesion and health benefits, especially for vulnerable groups?
Initiative be part of the solution to contemporary issues such as obesity, mental health, the influence of social media, unrealistic standards of physical appearance and lifestyle, as well as the impact of the gaming industry. This requires a systematic approach and collaboration among schools, sports organizations, local communities and governments. Thank you.
In my discussions ahead of this hearing, there was one conversation that I distinctly remember. And in that conversation, I was told that if there's one member in every family that practices sport, if you reach that particular member of that household, then you reach the whole family. We have, through sport, a very, very strong tool to promote social inclusion, to promote healthy lifestyles. When I look at the data and the statistics on obesity in the European Union, non-communicable diseases as a result of inactivity, it is nothing beyond shocking. Just by looking at the expenditure as a result of inactivity, you realize that we are spending 8 billion euro in this union on these issues. This is the combined health budget annually of two of our member states, of Luxembourg and Lithuania. That's what they spend on healthcare annually. Now we have to work with the member states to have this included in their action plans when we take forward our work on the health enhancing physical recommendation. But I also believe that we have to promote sport in other policy areas, in education, in our social priorities, in our integration priorities. And that is something that I will work on with my colleagues in the College of Commissioners, with Designate Vice President Minzato, with the Designate Commissioner responsible for health, and with other commissions to ensure that sport is a tool, that we use sport as a tool to be able to deliver on these issues.
Mrs. Sorel from the PFE.
La commissaire Elena Dalli a évoqué la
Commissioner Dalli talked about recasting the directive on sexual abuse on minors, and she was pleased about making progress when it came to consent on sexual relations. So, as Commissioner Johansson said in Libe, and this is a quote, consent means that it means voluntary and freely given consent, and it can't be deduced from silence or lack of resistance from the child. That's the end of the statement. Now, experts say that children do not have the experience or the language they need to talk about these things, and everyone can imagine how much damage is caused. So I think this is basically allowing paedophilia, which is completely out of line with our European values. I mean, would you condemn this approach to the sexual abuse of children, and will you do something to put a stop to it? Thank you.
Look, when it comes to children, we have a moral and a legal obligation to protect our children. This is not something that I take lightly, and indeed we have had a lot of work being done in the current mandate to deliver a strong children's rights strategy that protects children in our courtrooms, in judicial systems, through which we have an integrated protection system for our children, where we protect our children online with a better Internet for Kids strategy, where we have cooperated with this Parliament to deliver on concrete measures that protect our children. Now, our values are not something that should be up for discussion. We will continue to promote our values of equality, the work that Commissioner Dalli has championed throughout her mandate, and we will continue to ensure that these are mainstreamed and protected in our legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Petro? Excuse me, this was wrong. Mr. Squarta from the ECR.
Benvenuto, Commissario.
Welcome, Commissioner Designate Micallef. I would like to pick up on the issue of digitalization of small and medium-sized cultural enterprises and the opportunities offered by this. the digital switch is very complicated, particularly for small and medium-sized companies who are often the guardians of our traditions and are innovative, but they need money and they need training. Given that our cultural sector needs to be preserved in the digital age, I'd like to ask what strategies you intend to adopt to assist small and medium companies. Young peoples and the new generation need to be at the forefront of conveying our cultural traditions. You've mentioned projects in your written answers. How do you intend to expand on this to ensure that young people are supported in the cultural sector? How will you ensure cultural inclusion without compromising European cultural traditions?
In the European Union, we have a rich and diverse cultural tapestry. This is one of the greatest assets that our union has, and we must continue to invest in developing it. Indeed, our treaties give us the role of supporting member states to make sure that their cultures flourish, as well as the role of coordinating efforts and providing strategic guidance. In view of challenges that no member state, in view of changes that no member states can tackle on their own. Changes like digitalization, like AI, like environmental sustainability. This is precisely why we need to invest all our efforts as a matter of urgency on having a culture compass that guides and harnesses the multiple dimensions of culture in EU policy making, but also that promotes culture in other policy areas. So working together with the designate commissioner responsible for digital, the designate commissioner responsible for skills, and the designate vice president responsible for skills, we will promote culture as a tool to have it more accessible to SMEs and in the digital sphere. Now, when it comes to tools that we have at our disposal, because we will need tools, right now we have a fragmented approach with culture featuring in around 20 funding instruments, and we will need to ensure that we are strategic in the next MFF, deciding on what we want to finance and then how best we will finance it.
Now it's Mr. Petro from the Renew Group.
Mr. Micallef, youth participation in democratic life is a key part of your portfolio, but there is still much to do for young people with fewer opportunities. Many barriers exist for those in institutions of or living in poor conditions, such as those from minority groups like the Roma. The growing digital divide or language barriers, for example, there is compelling evidence that young people are not disinterested about politics, but rather insufficiently informed and disempowered. Their voices often go unheard, or at best, others speak on their behalf. Real engagement means everyone should have the chance to participate. This is especially important when we talk about children and young people. What specific initiatives will you reinforce for young people with fewer opportunities to engage?
Mr. Micallef.
One of the key tools that immediately comes to mind when you refer to this is the youth policy dialogues. This will be a tool where we encourage young people to use their own voice in shaping the future that they want to see for our union. As a college of commissioners, it will give us the chance to listen to young people, to understand their needs and their concerns, and to be able to act upon them. Now, we will have the first set of youth policy dialogues in the first 100 days. I will organize mine in the first 100 days, and I will encourage and support other commissioners to do the same, to complement our work on the youth check, to complement the President's youth advisory body. And I see 3 pillars on which I want to focus the way we organize these policy dialogues. First, I want them to be structured, to have prepared and informed discussions where young people can express their views and then have a follow-up with these feeding, ideally, into the President's Youth Advisory Board. Secondly, I want them to be innovative with hands-on approaches. I want to take the Union and to take this institution to the member states and to our regions. The last thing we need here are echo chambers where people come and pay us lip service. We want to hear frustrations. We want to hear what we can improve. And we want the youth to tell us this. And third, we want these to be a celebration of our values. We want these to be a celebration of inclusion, of diversity. And I know that many of you have ideas on how we should work on these. And I am very keen to have you on board and to have your participation in these dialogues as well.
Mr. Ross Sempre from the S&D Group. Ross Sempre.
Thank you very much. Buenas tardes, señor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Micallef. Well, our young people spend half their lives online, so building a safe space on the internet for young people means actively protecting them from dangers online, exploitation, inappropriate or illegal content, etc. I mean, it's crucial to invest in digital literacy and also age verification services for online content. So in this context, could you explain a little bit more about the measures envisaged in the action plan against cyberbullying, and how do you plan to cooperate when it comes to fighting bullying online with Commissioner-designate Labib and the Executive Vice President Virkunen? Thank you.
Hatred, bullying and harassment have no place in our societies. We are societies based on respect, on diversity and on inclusion. And this applies both to the physical and the virtual worlds. Now, to me, there is already sufficient and clear information to show that excessive screen time in our society is causing harm, physical harm, psychological harm, as well as societal damage. We have made, in this mandate, significant steps forward. If you look at the Digital Services Act that we have in place, this already includes specific rules and regulations through which very large online platforms and very large online search engines have to comply with age verification, age-appropriate content, parental controls, and cyberbullying. But now it's the time to take the next step. We need a strategy that really considers the fact that the more time people are spending online, the greater the risk and the exposure to cyberbullying. The strategy on cyberbullying will go hand in hand with the work of the designated vice presidents responsible for tech sovereignty on the EU-wide inquiry on the effects of social media. And I see it based on 4 pillars. The first thing we have to do is have a shared common definition of what cyberbullying is. That is the starting point to this discussion. Then we have to see what best practices are being implemented in member states and roll them out in our union. The third point, if you'll allow me, is to cooperate with civil society through the Trusted Flagger scheme to ensure that they contribute to our efforts in detecting and identifying cyberbullying online. And finally, encouraging a culture of seeking advice and of reporting cyberbullying, because there are still many cases that go undetected, and that is something we need to work on.
Mrs. Rieper from the EPP.
My questions concern culture. It's correct that the promotion of democracy is the reason why the Commission wants to support the creative and cultural sector. So culture and creation are relevant and important for discourse on social aspects as well. And we know that this can present new possibilities, but there can be a loss of transparency in the supply chain through the cultural industries. And there are ideological issues that can affect the way this is implemented. Hence my question, which possibilities do you see in the framework of the AI law, but also when it comes to the AI strategy that you mentioned, to allow creative and cultural production to promote these values rather than endangering them? And in the framework of your portfolio, how do you see the potential to promote democracy by using AI?
So when it comes to AI, I firmly believe we need a forward-looking strategy, one that enables and reinforces human creativity, one that embraces change, and one that boosts the competitiveness of these sectors. These are sectors that are profoundly affected by AI. This effect is mainly because this is a tool that is being used across the sectoral value chain. And as a result, we can expect some structural changes even in the job market. We have made significant steps in this mandate to support and protect the cultural sector in this digital age. We have the Digital Services Act, we have the Digital Markets Act, we have the Copyright Framework, we have the AI Act, which are all concrete tools, but these are tools that predate the generative AI boom, where we train models to come up with instantaneously answers for different things. So what we need is something tailor-made, something that is specifically for the cultural and creative sector industries. In my view, this has to, first and foremost, support the adaptations needed by the cultural and creative sector industry in view of these developments in the AI sector. Secondly, we have to promote the ethical and fair use of AI, where we have transparency in these platforms on how these models are being trained and on the remuneration that is due to cultural and creative professionals. And third and final point is that where we encourage collaboration between the tech industry as well as the cultural and creative sectors to really unleash their potential in the AI sector.
Mrs. Guderi from the Greens, Eva.
Thank you, and thank you for your interest and attention to youth. So my question is basically a follow-up on a point that you tackled before. You mentioned the Youth Advisory Board, the Youth Dialogues, the Youth Check, and these are all great tools to address the multidimensional issues that are affecting youth. However, our concern is that they usually regard and engage only a small part of the young population, and this might not include an actual impact assessment. So our question is, how do you intend to reach a wider range of young people across Europe, considering social, economic background, provenience, ethnicity, education level, and so on and so forth? And how will you ensure that this also engages the perspective of future generation, including an actual impact assessment of EU policy on the future?
The youth policy dialogues really have to be a tool through which we allow young people to express themselves. These will be organized by all the commissioners. I will work with them to coordinate the efforts in this respect. And I have already mentioned how I want these to be innovative, how I want to take them to regions, how I want to ensure that we do not have echo chambers where people come and pay us lip service. This will be complemented by the Youth Check and the Youth Advisory Board, where we will ensure that we also gather views and factor them into legislation. What these will not be, what these tools will not be, will be a substitute for our encouragement to young people to make their views heard in our societies, in our political systems. We have young people that are significantly underrepresented in our political systems. And this is translating into a situation where they are not bothering to vote. If we look at the last European elections, you had a 42% turnout for people who are under the age of 40, whereas people who are over 50 years of age have turned out in percentages that are over 55%. Now, that creates also an issue from an intergenerational fairness point of view, because it translates into policies that many times might not take into account the views of young people. So what we really need to do is encourage young people to participate in political life, to be active in political life, because what we need is to have another generation of champions for the European Union. Like I remember the young people who were champions in my member state, in the member state that I come from, at the time of EU membership and in those discussions. They were the ones who were driving forward the movement that led to our accession.
Mrs. Mileti from the EPP.
Πρόεδρε, κύριε υποψήφιε επίτροπε, δυστυχώς παρατηρούμε μια σημαντική αύξηση του χρόνου.
Unfortunately, there is an excessive time on the internet spent by young people, and their uncontrolled access on the internet and the social media contributes to the time they spend before screens. Our youth is subject to harmful content which can threaten their mental health or physical health and their development and well-being, and with consequences that we may not be able to foresee. In your written answer to our questions, you said that you will work on a pan-European research on the broader impact of the social media on well-being. Can you tell us what specific measures and actions you intend to take to ensure the protection of the mental health of young people? Have you got a specific action plan to ensure safety on the internet for youth? Can you give us further details on this?
The protection of young people online is an absolute priority on which we have to devote our efforts. It's quite clear to me that this is having significant harmful effects on our young children, which are vulnerable online. Now, there will be an EU-wide inquiry on the negative effects of social media, which will be led by the Vice President for Tech Sovereignty, Vice President Verkunen, to which I will support, and this will go hand in hand with the action plan against cyberbullying. The action plan against cyberbullying, where we will have to have cooperation with civil society to ensure that we detect cases of cyberbullying, where we use their expertise, because they have accumulated knowledge of what this looks like, to report these cases, where we roll out best practices that are already implemented in member states, where we work on a common definition of what cyberbullying is, and this will be the basis of our work. This will complement also the work that was done in this mandate. We have a strategy that is specifically targeting better internet for kids. We have recommendations that are aimed at educators and at policymakers to ensure that children are protected online in education environments as well. And this is work that we will have to sustain in this mandate through the implementation of the Children's Rights Strategy. This is something which I hope to have an exchange with this Parliament on, and where we can work forward together as well. But we must also promote other policies, such as sport, to give young people and children avenues to substitute screen time with healthier options.
Mr. Pappas.
Taking into account the recent cuts in funding in the cultural area in various member states, it is clear that this funding, reduced funding, affect the vulnerable societies. Access to cultural events and activities is important to promote social cohesion, expression and well-being in the community. What specific strategies will you apply to foster accessibility to cultural activities for these marginalized communities? How do you intend to ensure that all, independently of a social condition, can actively participate? And what actions will you take to select these communities in the design and implementation of cultural programs, taking into account that their voices will be heard adequately? Thank you.
We have to be strategic when it comes to culture. This strategic perspective is one where we have to promote culture as an area that helps member states, where we help member states promote social inclusion, where we use it as a tool to deliver on social inclusion. This will be done through our efforts in the Culture Compass, where we will also have strategic action that ensures access to culture in our regions, for example. Our regions are facing significant challenges, lack of access to services, issues with digital connectivity, issues of different sorts. And we must promote through culture incentives where we help young people have more access to cultural works. This is an issue where I want to work in the next Culture Compass to have to promote and preserve culture in our regions, because this creates opportunities for cultural tourism, this creates jobs, this creates incentives for vibrant and vibrant communities. So one of the pillars on which we base our cultural compass has to take into account the promotion of culture in these policies, whether it's in social, with the work of Designate Vice President Minsatu, in education as well, and in other areas.
Thank you. Mrs. Scheuring-Wilgus.
According to the European model for sport, which you've mentioned already, which has been mentioned here, sport is something that supports integration, the spirit of solidarity. To conclude, sports unifies us across boundaries between countries, but between groups of people. However, there is a group of people that is still discriminated against, women in sports. My question, first of all, how would you fight sexism, sexual harassment and sexual violence against women in sports? And my second question, 15% of all relations in social media relate to sports done by women. How can we increase that? How can we increase visibility of women doing sports in media? Thank you.
So, to me, sports is about our way of life in the European Union. It's about the European way of life. Our values is what will guide our work. We want a values-based European sport model. A values-based European sport model that can help us promote our values and priorities, including with the sporting movement. We have an opportunity to be politically assertive in our stronger, in our renewed European sports model, and we have to make it clear to the sporting movement what our expectations are in this area. Another strand of the sport model that will have an important role to play in this respect will be our sporting diplomacy, where we make it clear to the global community what our standards in sport are, the values of equality, the values of inclusion. Another area of work will have to be the promotion of sport to reach objectives in other policy areas, be they social, education, etc. Now, in complementing this, we will have a health-enhancing physical activity recommendation that will be renewed. We will have to work with member states to ensure that the barriers that there are for women, for LGBTIQ communities, and those who are disadvantaged right now are torn down through action plans with concrete measures that promote inclusion, and a coordinating role for me as Commissioner to oversee those efforts, to make sure that we deliver on those.
Mrs. Wieczek.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Commissioner-designate, the President of the Commission has entrusted all of the Commissioner-designates to support candidate countries to prepare for joining the EU. The people of some Western Balkan candidate countries have been in the negotiating process for EU membership for more than a decade. In addition to consequent negotiating fatigue and EU skepticism, their enthusiasm and support for the EU membership is often fluctuating because of controversial handling of some of the topics in the EU, like migration, gender, and peace and war. Having in mind that the support for EU integration is the highest among youth compared to the other age groups, what are you planning to do to include the governmental and non-governmental youth organizations from candidate countries in the programs and bodies of the Commission, such as the Youth and Policy Dialogue or the President's Youth Advisory Board? Thank you.
Now, when we speak about enlargement, this is about millions of people in areas that neighbor our union that aspire to live their European dream. It's true that it is a merit-based process, but we also have a duty. We are duty-bound to help them realize these aspirations. In this current mandate, through programs like Erasmus and through our actions on sport, we have already integrated the participation of many of the candidate countries in these programs and in these initiatives. Now, this is a powerful reminder of how culture and sport can be enablers on our strategic priorities in enlargement, but in global engagement. And it is in our best interest to use them as such. In the next mandates, we will have to have the discussion. I look forward to working with my colleagues in the Commission to have possibilities to discuss, even with the youth. I had the opportunity to mention a bit earlier on how I remember the youth in the member state that I know best and their championing role in leading my member state to EU membership, and it is our duty to help the youth in enlargement countries to be able to do the same. I have already had a discussion with the designate commissioner responsible for enlargement, and we are already having ideas of how we can, through the youth dialogue, involve youth in accession countries in sharing their ideas and their views with us on these issues.
Mr. Bartolika.
Thank you. Welcome to the European Union, the European Parliament, excuse me. I'll switch to Croatian. Ljudi u Hrvatskoj.
People in Croatia are very worried.
especially parents are worried with the gender ideology, because this is happening already in primary schools. They feel that children are confused. I have two questions for you. Can you please give us a definition to the question, what is a woman? And secondly, do you think that the competition of men in a women's sport or women discipline is something that can be considered a European value?
Look, I believe we have a moral and a legal obligation to protect our children. We have a European sport model that is values-based, that is based on the values of inclusion, of diversity, of equality. I believe that sport is for everyone and it's for anyone. I will encourage Europeans to be active because this contributes to their health and to their well-being. When it comes to the participation of people from different genders or different identities in sporting competitions, in elite sporting competitions specifically, this is one of the foundations of our sport movement, of our sports model, that the sporting movement is to decide on how they govern their sports without external influence. And this is a sport model that I will continue to defend. It's their decision, it's the sporting movement's decision to decide on these issues. My priority will be to encourage Europeans to be active and to stay healthy. Sport is for everyone, no matter what your background is, what your gender is, what your identity is, because that is the union that I believe in, a union of equality.
Mr. Micallef.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Commissioner-designate, while recognizing the economical and social power of elite sports, it's also vital that the European sports model ensures a more equitable distribution of resources, particularly to grassroots sports. How do you plan to strengthen the European sports model in order to ensure that the grassroots sports clubs benefit from the revenues earned mainly at the top level? And what do you think would be the impact of the two recent decisions by the Court of Justice of the European Union on the European sports model and its governance? The two decisions being the one regarding the European Super League and the other one regarding the transfer rules. Thank you.
Our sport model is based on 5 principles. So the autonomy of sporting organizations, an open system of promotion and relegation, the competitive nature of sports, the redistribution and the solidarity between elite and grassroots sports, and the role of volunteers. Now, I have mentioned at length how this autonomy means that the sporting movement can govern and regulate their sport without undue external influence, but this is not without any conditions. In fact, there are 2 very important preconditions to this autonomy. The first is that they respect EU law, and the second is that they follow good governance principles. Good governance principles which are accountability, they have to be clear, they have to be transparent, and they have to be fair in the way that they manage sport. We will have the opportunity to be very political in our work on the sport model, where we make it clear to the sporting movement that the respect for our competition law is not something that we can compromise on, and we will have to ensure rather that they comply with these legislations that we have inside the Union. This will be key in the next few months. And then we have also to look at, for example, whether we regulate sports like what's happening in Italy with the way that football is being regulated, whether we need to reinforce our values in view of the involvement of state actors in our sport, in golf, in tennis, in boxing, where we now see third countries investing heavily in our sporting movement.
Mrs. Tomacic.
Najlepša hvala. Thank you for the floor. I would like to know how will you ensure that UCIC will not be just another bureaucratic exercise where the Commission will just check off inclusion of the youth without taking into account the ideas of the youth. How will this youth check be in practice? Which policies will be covered and which not? It is difficult to say which policy is not concerned with the youth. How will you measure the effectiveness of youth checks and its implications on concrete legislative proposals? How will you make this youth check transparent, and how the youths will be able to see whether their contribution was taken into account? And how will you inform the young generation about the existence of youth check as a mechanism?
There is one key word, and I think actually you have used it: transparency. The youth check is something that will be applied systematically, so it's not just for specific policies. Every proposal from next year, from 2025, every proposal that will be in the first annex of the Commission work program will be assessed for its relevance to youth. Now, the fact that it will apply to all the initiatives in the Commission work program, it means that there is a process there that involves the two co-legislators on strategic programming of our legislation, that gives them visibility as to which proposals and initiatives this would be applying to. So there is also the possibility of the institutions, the other co-legislators, having their say on which actions they believe are relevant to youth. If a proposal is then deemed to be relevant, there will be a youth-specific impact assessment. And thirdly, we will also consider the possibility of there being youth-specific consultations. Now, I will make myself available to this Parliament as well to stakeholders, so that if they feel strongly about a particular initiative, a particular legislation that they deem to be relevant, I will take that feedback on board, and I will make it a point that I communicate that message, because I understand that my role is to be the voice of youth, the voice of this generation in the European Commission in the next mandate. I would be more than happy also to work with colleagues in this committee to deliver on this.
Mr. Ruotolo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Designate, well, we need to do everything possible to ensure that all young people living in the European Union can enjoy the same rights and live free from discrimination or intimidation of any kind. I mean, it all starts in childhood. Educational poverty, which mainly strikes the disadvantaged areas of our cities and lead to criminality and gangs, leads to cultural poverty and is a major problem. The people in the outskirts of our cities have a right to dream and change their future, and the European Union needs to support them and put their rights at the heart of its policies. So how do you intend to improve the effectiveness of EU strategies on the rights of minors from 2021 and ensure that they're clearly implemented? How will you work with the Executive Vice President Designate Minzatu to boost the childhood guarantee? Thank you.
The Honourable Member mentioned a line which has really resonated. Children must be able to dream. Our children have no responsibilities. The responsibilities are ours as decision makers, as legislators, as politicians, to ensure that we give them a future filled with hope and with opportunity. Now, in the previous mandate, in this mandate, we have put in place a strong children's rights strategy. Now it's time to implement and to take the next steps. I believe we have to be a lot more ambitious. If we look at our children in our society, we have 20% of our societies in the European Union that are made up of children, and a quarter of them who are at risk of poverty. So we're speaking about a little bit more than 20 million children that are at risk of poverty. That is the combined population of Austria, Bulgaria, and Ireland. At risk of poverty now means that they are on a cliff edge. One unexpected move, and they are poor. Our target is that by 2030, we alleviate 5 million children from being at risk of poverty, and to me that is a bit of a concern, because that leaves a significant number of children behind, which also poses a challenge from an intergenerational point of view, because it creates an intergenerational transmission of poverty. This is something which we need to work on hand in hand with the designated Vice President for People and Skills. We need to reinforce the Child's Guarantee that gives children access to education, care, and healthcare. But we also need to work on the action plan on the implementation of the Pillar of Social Rights, because that helps the parents, and there is a direct link between the labor market conditions of the parents and the state of children in our societies.
Mr. Sousa Silva.
Signor Commissario.
Commissioner, Mr. Micallef, despite the recent recommendation from the Commission on fighting online piracy of directly provided contents, this piracy is still undermining the sporting and individual audiovisual sectors transmitting directly, and that has a severe financial impact on the sector, and these losses have an indirect trickle-down effect on member states. Clearly, there are limits on the current provisions in combating digital piracy. That's the lie of the land. My question, therefore, is the following. The Institute for Intellectual Property of the EU has carried out an assessment. Have they concluded that the current laws are inefficient? Therefore, will the Commissioner commit himself to come up swiftly with a bill to see to it that our contents-related sectors cut off by the CEP?
This is directly related to the competitiveness of our culture and our sports sectors. If you look at the sports sector specifically, there is virtually no demand for sports content which is not live in our union. So this means also that there's an effect on the revenues that are generated by the sports movement, and thereby an effect on one of the foundations of the pillars of our sports model, that basically ensures the solidarity between elite sport and grassroots sport. Because if you can't have revenues, then you cannot invest in grassroots sport. Now, I am very much aware of the initiatives in this Parliament, the resolutions that there were, and these have led to a recommendation which was adopted this year, through which we will assess the efforts of member states to take down illegal content, pirated content, as regards to sport. That assessment is still ongoing with the EU Intellectual Property Office. It is something that we will monitor. It's an assessment that is earmarked to end in November next year. The date is specifically chosen to coincide with the assessment on the Digital Services Act and the way it interacts with the copyright framework. And subject to that assessment, we will decide on what the next steps would be. It is not excluded that there will be the need for either policy or legislative action, but that will depend on the outcome of the assessment on the recommendation that we have in place at the moment.
Mr. Anadiotis. Yeah, please turn on the mic.
Αξιότιμε κύριε Μικάλεφ, οι προκλήσεις για τη νέα γενιά είναι πολύ σύνδετες.
Dear Mr. Micallef, the challenges for the young generation are many and complex. We see that we have a special role for social media. We have bullying, verbal, physical or psychological. And it's not only a Greek phenomenon, it's all over Europe. We see youth becoming violent and aggressive, even unprovoked, either virtually or in real life, in and out of school. According to Eurobarometer, 1 in every 10 children becomes a victim every month. And we have even seen children commit suicide. The main reasons for that are the fact that either the family or the teachers are not involved. So our question is, what is your vision on this issue? What are the actions you are going to take?
There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that there is a direct link between the time that people spend online and the negative effects, the harmful effects of excessive screen time. You have mentioned psychological effects. There are physical effects and effects to our society, which you have also pointed out. This means that we have to work in the next Commission to implement recommendations that we have adopted during this mandate, giving policymakers as well as educators guidance on what we expect in terms of how they manage with digital tools with our children. And building on those, we have to take our work forward on the EU-wide inquiry, which will be led by the Vice President, on the harmful effects of social media, as well as on the action plan on cyberbullying. This is something that I will work on as a matter of priority, specifically looking at the impacts of kids online, of children online, where we see negative also mental health effects of excessive screen time. And it's an area of work where I will devote a lot of attention. One area that I would like to use is the promotion of sport and culture as alternatives to time that children spend online, to give them a healthier, viable alternative where they can actually improve and better their well-being.
Thank you. Mrs. Sorel?
Nos jeunes éprouvent de...
Our young people are coming up against more and more difficulties in their lives. There's political disillusionment. We need to provide a model for a common future, but we cannot do that. We are finding it more and more difficult to form a political community because the socio-cultural resources are decided on by the people, and we can't integrate untrammeled migration into our societies. Given this flow of immigration, a lot of money is going to the detriment of our children. Moreover, the European Union is doing everything to pillage the talents of the global south, which is punishing those countries, and then the people who come here aren't thriving either. Are you aware that this pillage by the European Union of the global south is morally reprehensible? And speakers cut off.
I want to promote a model in the European Union that is based on intergenerational fairness. And one of the pillars of how we ensure cohesion in our society is to have harmony between the different generations. This is one of the foundations on which I plan to build the intergenerational fairness strategy. We recognize that where there are low perceptions of intergenerational fairness, that translates into disillusionment, discontent, and frustration, which also threatens our values in the European Union, our democratic values, no less. So my work will be focused on delivering an intergenerational fairness strategy that encourages generations to work together, that ensures equal opportunity for people in different generations, that promotes active and empowered citizens. And that means we have to work across a number of policies to deliver on the aspirations of our citizens, be it in housing, be it in employment, be it in other areas. That is how we will take work forward, and our values will always be what guides our work.
Mr. Zingaretti.
Thank you very much. Commissioner-designate, cultural and creative sectors comprise over 4.5 billion in turnover, social cohesion, freedom, autonomy, and they also provide the capacity for criticism in our democracies. There are also many workers there. Now, the creative sector is going through major changes. The internet means that content is moving from cinema screens and televisions to people's pockets, and AI often establishes people's preferences. It's no longer about stories, it's about creating profit via AI. How can we guarantee the cultural aspect of the audiovisual sector and freedom of creation? And how do you believe that we can have labeling requirements for content that's fully created by AI tools to preserve our freedom? Thank you.
I believe we have to embrace change to mitigate its risks, but at the same time take the opportunity that this brings. You mentioned the number of people that are working in this sector. I believe that these provide immense contributions to our economies, but their potential is still untapped. We have already a basis in protecting and supporting the cultural and creative sector industries in the digital world. I mentioned before the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. We have the Copyrights Framework and the AI Framework, which all include specific provisions, especially in the AI Act, that make it clear that AI content must be labeled, that when it is used, the creators, the cultural professionals must be adequately reimbursed, and with specific regulations on how the models are being trained using creative content. Now we have to work on a strategy in the AI sector, which is deliberate and targeting these sectors. It's a strategy that must support these sectors in the digital world, must support these sectors to make the adaptations needed to be able to exploit the potential that AI gives them, that promotes ethical and fair use of AI, where content is labeled as generated by AI, where content is clearly marked as generated by AI, and where we encourage collaboration between the tech industry and the cultural and creative sector industries to make sure that we unleash their potential in our economies.
Mr. Strudevsky.
Thank you. Sport has huge potential in terms of promoting the EU values. However, there are numerous examples on fixing matches, fixing sports competitions. It undermines not just the fair play rule, but also the public trust in sports. It also destroys the reputation of our athletes, and it is a major problem for the EU values. At the moment, we only have one instrument in international law that gives us a chance to fight those fixing, those manipulations. But the EU cannot join the convention I'm referring to. For 9 years, this is being blocked by Malta. Since you represent Malta, could you tell me what you can do for the convention to embrace the EU?
Before I answer, I want to make it clear that I am here as designated commissioner responsible for intergenerational fairness, youth, culture, and sport, and I'm not representing any particular member state. I am representing the interests of all union citizens. Now, integrity and fairness in sports are two key values that are absolutely crucial. If you look at Article 165 of our treaty, which specifically refers to sport, these are two key words that are mentioned in this article. They are values that I hold very dear. The Micallef Convention is precisely about integrity and fairness in sport. Through it, there's an encouragement for public bodies, for sports organizations, as well as for commercial organizations to work together to prevent, detect, and sanction the manipulation of sports competition. And it's an international instrument in which the Commission has had a huge role in shaping. Now, the Commission has also presented a proposal to the Council to sign and ratify this convention on behalf of the Union and its member states. And so far, with just one exception, these decisions have been taken by consensus, by unanimity in Council. What I will tell you is you have my word, you have my commitment that I will work to install dialogue with the member states. I will work to and work with the future presidency especially, so that even when the conditions are right, this is again put on the Council's agenda with a view to it being unblocked. The final decision, however, rests with the member states in Council.
Mrs. Scuderi.
Creative Europe is the only dedicated fund supporting the cultural and creative sector. As you know, some sectors have expressed concern about the direction of the media sub-program, which currently seems to favor only a certain focus and certain actors to detriment of a more culture-oriented approach. There are concerns that this could compromise the vitality and diversity, for example, of the audiovisual production in Europe. What is your vision for the programme, and what political orientation do you wish to give to the programme, particularly given its upcoming review? Will we see, as Parliament has already called for, a reinforcement of Creative Europe in the coming years, while preserving its emphasis on the cultural sector and reinforcing freedom of artistic and creative expression? And very importantly, how are you planning to fund it?
Creative Europe has been a very strong ally to the cultural and creative sector industries in Europe. It has a relatively modest budget. We're speaking about 2.44 billion here, through which we have helped the cultural and creative sectors to develop, safeguard, and promote our cultural heritage and linguistic diversity, and to boost their competitiveness in our economies. It is a program that has seen us also cooperate with countries beyond our union, beyond member states, through direct support to the cultural and creative sector industries for cross-border activities, supporting audiovisual production, supporting the book publishing industries, and as well as supporting leveraging of private investments towards the cultural and creative sector industries. These have all been crucial, and through this program we have also supported initiatives of artistic excellence, of inclusion, of diversity, with the European Capital of Culture being the most known example of such. Now, as you mentioned, there is the review of the current programs that is ongoing that will feed into the proposals in the next MFF, the proposals which will come in 2026. I will work with the designate vice president as well as with the designate commissioner responsible for budget to ensure that we have a strong budget that gives us the means to deliver on our objectives in this sector. Our objectives are very clear. We want more competitiveness and more innovative cultural and creative sector industries, and we want to improve the working conditions of our artists. We will deliver on those by working together as one college with the co-legislators.
Mrs. Malak.
Dziękuję, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You are to deal also with intergenerational cooperation. What I would like to focus on is seniors. We have negative demographic trends, it's a fact. I'm glad that you want to involve the young people and focus on the young. But my question is, what will you do for the seniors? How can we help them fight discrimination, loneliness, discrimination in the workplace? When you look at various industries, you see that very often seniors are laid off, despite the fact that their job should be protected, and then it's very difficult for them to find a different place of employment. So what concrete steps would you do to support silver economy and mentoring in the workplace? Thank you.
The way I view intergenerational fairness is about ensuring that everyone in our society has a voice. To me, it's quite clear that intergenerational fairness rests on 3 pillars. I mentioned it before. Harmony between the different generations, so not pitting generations against each other, not blaming generations for different challenges that we find ourselves in. Having equal opportunities for people in different generations, and having active, empowered citizens that trust public bodies. The concept of intergenerational fairness between generations, is one that is in our treaties, and it is one that I look forward to take work in very seriously. Now, this is also about our democratic values, as I mentioned before. Low perceptions of intergenerational fairness create frustrations in our society. They cause disconnect and disillusionment, which allow fertile ground for ideas that are not aligned to our values. But it is also about our demography. We have aging populations, greater longevity, and lower fertility rates in the Union, which in itself, the fact that we have greater longevity is a testament to our quality of life. But we also have to adapt our policies, for example, to the fact that 1 in 2 young people that are being born today will live to 100 years of age. The way we look at education, the way we look at employment policies, the way we look at housing policies, as well as climate change. So this is really something that affects horizontally. It will need efforts across different policy areas. We will develop a strategy with targeted actions that we will follow up on. And I will use foresight to ensure that we have evidence-based policies and evidence-based actions that guide us in our work.
Mr. Petrov.
Been tasked with creating continuity between child and youth participation as part of implementing the EU strategy on the rights of the child. For children living in institutions, participation is especially difficult. They are often isolated with little opportunity for self-expression. The institutionalization is crucial, especially ones with fewer opportunities and disabilities to be fully included in society and ultimately in democratic life. Do you plan to address the institutionalization as part of child participation? What measures will you introduce in the implementation of the EU strategy on the right of the child to improve participation for children with fewer opportunities and children with disabilities?
Children are not the future. Children are the now, children are the present, and we must make sure that no child is left behind. When it comes to children in institutional facilities, I know that there have been efforts coordinated also in this mandate to focus on the institutionalization, using EU funds to help in this process. But in the children's rights strategy, we can go a step further. We have a children's participation platform through which we listen to the views of children, to take their views into account. And I would be very keen to have the views of children coming from all backgrounds, all walks of life, to enrich our work, to inspire our work, and to ensure that we give children a future where they have the right to education, the right to care, and the right to equal opportunities.
Mr. Jongen.
Article 3 des Vertrags. Article 3 of the Treaty on the European Union requires that the cultural heritage of Europe be protected. If you look at the specific cultural promotion in Europe, in the EU, it's basically a left-wing chasm that opens up. In Perform Europe, for example, 42 inclusive, diverse and green partner projects are to be promoted, amongst them queer deities in migration, body perspective, eco-feminist perspective, and Caliban and Rich as a play, and I quote, that celebrates the subjugation of white Europeans. 2.1 million euros set aside for that, and many other examples similar. Gender ideologies and political activities against white people, is that something that you would support in protecting our heritage? And if no, this sort of abuse of the speaker's broken off.
The support of cultural heritage, and our diversity is one of the pillars on which we will build the cultural compass. When we speak about cultural diversity and our values, these are mainstreamed into all our actions. If you look at Creative Europe, we have a program that really promotes our values and priorities. These are values and priorities that are through which our cultural professionals need to promote as a result to be able to access this funding, thereby making them more visible. These are values that for us are very important. We speak about equality, and that includes age equality, that includes gender equality, that includes equality between different people, and that is not something that in this union we can compromise on.
Mrs. Morace.
Presidente. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Commissioner-designate, I imagine that you know the rules on differentiated treatment when it comes to professional sport practiced by men and that practiced by women. So 2 questions. Which measures do you intend to take to invite the Sports Federation to ensure that the awards provided in sporting competitions are the same for men and women, and so prize money here? And then secondly, how do you want to, are you going to cooperate with interested parties to prevent discrimination, which prevents the professional growth of female athletes, especially when compared with male athletes. And here also I'd like to know about training and people's lives post their sporting career. Thank you.
Look, one of the foundations of our sport model and the values-based sport model that we will promote is the autonomy of sport organizations to govern their sport independently. That does not mean that we cannot have this opportunity to be assertive with them, to send a strong signal of what our expectations are in various areas, because a values-based European sport model is one that stands up for human and for social rights. And that is for us, a cornerstone of what this should be. So we will have to take this opportunity to work together to make it absolutely clear that when it comes to big sporting events, when it comes to sporting competitions, equality is something that is an absolute priority. And I have already been very clear that this autonomy is not unconditional. They must respect EU law, and they must respect good governance principles. We will make this absolutely clear when we engage with sporting federations, when we engage with sporting movements, as well as when we are engaged in sporting diplomacy with third countries, with the sporting movement outside our union, because these are values that for us are very important, and we will continue to promote them and defend them.
Thank you so much, Shafar. We will now start a third round of questions, and I will give the floor to the invited committee, starting with the Vice Chair of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, Mrs. Jagna Maciej-Walczak.
Thank you, Chair, for floor. Mr. Commissioner-designate. The question already has been asked in writing by our committee and during this hearing. However, EMBL committee is not fully satisfied with the detail of your answers. Could you please elaborate further and with clear and concrete commitments and examples on the following? What actions and measures will you propose to ensure the social inclusion of all generations and their full participation in society and the economy? And what legislative initiatives do you envisage with regard to youth and intergenerational fairness, and how are you going to cooperate with Executive Vice President designate Minzatu in this context? Thank you.
Intergenerational fairness is about ensuring that everyone has a voice in our society. It's about ensuring that we listen to everyone and act upon their views, that we leave no one behind in whatever we do, whilst at the same time future-proofing our legislation. Now, this requires a whole-of-commission approach, because it affects our society in its entirety. It requires coordination and collaboration with all the members of the future college. And I look forward to work with each and every one of them to promote inclusion and fairness in all actions that we take. I have spoken already to the designated vice president responsible for people and skills, and I will be at her side, working hand in hand with her to deliver in these areas, whether it's on the action plan, on the implementation of the pillar on social rights, or the anti-poverty strategy, which are going to be absolutely key in promoting inclusion and fairness. But this extends also to other members of college, because when we speak about intergenerational fairness, this touches upon housing issues, it touches upon climate change, where we need to ensure that we have a just transition as well as a transition that enables us to be greener. It touches upon employment policies, it touches upon public finances. these are all areas that will be impacted by our work on intergenerational fairness. So we will have a strategy that will have targeted actions, and where we will use foresight, because this is a tool that helps us anticipate future disruptions and future opportunities, where we can be proactive rather than reactive in shaping the future that we want.
Thank you. Mr. Javier Sasalejos, the Chair of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Micallef, I understand that you're in favor of limiting the time children spend online. But on top of this measure, would you give us more concrete examples of preventive measures against specifically cyberbullying? My second question would be about your social media inquiry, the inquiry you intend to conduct. Could you give us some details about that? Who will design that? Who will assess the results? It would be about contents or about users. And my third point would be, as in your written replies, you refer to the cooperation with the European Parliament in the context of the EU Children's Participation Platform. How you concretely see such a cooperation with this Parliament? Thank you.
I will start with your last question on the cooperation with this Parliament. When it comes to children, especially in the Child's Participation Platform, I am ready to work with this committee, but with other members of different committees, to ensure that we have a structured approach in the way that we tackle children's rights. In the previous mandates, I am aware that there was an intergroup on children's rights that was extremely constructive with suggestions, with ideas, also influencing legislation. The most notable example that comes to mind here is the Digital Services Act, where it's a result of the work of this Parliament that we have specific provisions that safeguard children in the Digital Services Act. I mentioned them before. Provisions on age gating, on age-appropriate content, on parental controls, on cyberbullying that were born in this Parliament. So there is a lot of value added that this Parliament can bring in our work on this. And I would be very keen to take this forward in this mandate as well. When it comes to cyberbullying, we will develop a strategy that will be based and will be built on the current framework that we have, the robust framework that is in this legislation, where we will protect our children online through best practices that are currently being implemented in member states, which we will roll out at union level, where we will promote the trusted flagger scheme in the DSA, where we will build on, for example, the digital identity wallet that will come into effect in 2026. And on this basis, we will ensure that we have a strategy that is coherent, holistic, and that protects our children online.
Thank you. Mr. Mario Mantovani, Vice Chair of the Committee on Legal Affairs, you have the floor for your question.
Signor Micallef.
Mr. Micallef, you've already touched on this point, but maybe you could go into greater depth. The main argument underlying the Union strategy on the rights of minors is that of integrating these rights into EU legislation. The Jury Committee in the EP, in its 2022 report on better legislation and merging forces to come up with better laws, encourages such integration, providing for an impact assessment of proposed bills. The Parliament requested that a text be slotted in on the rights of minors within the package of impact assessment tools. Are you in favour of bringing this text on minors' rights on board as part of the Commission's toolbox for its assessment?
Look, in my preparation for this hearing, when I was studying and looking at our children's rights strategy, there was a story that was recounted to me that really struck a chord, struck a nerve. As part of the children's participation platform, there was a group of children that was given an explanation of what this strategy meant for children. And there was this boy from Cyprus who, after hearing this presentation, told the officials that were delivering it, "This is well said, but I prefer well done." I believe that in this mandate, our efforts need to focus on the implementation of the children's rights strategy and on the fine-tuning and the adjustments that's necessary to it. Through the strategy, we have already a platform for coordination within the Commission, a coordination that brings together all parts of the Commission, so we ensure a child's friendly approach by default in everything that we do. Nonetheless, if there are ideas such as the ones that you have mentioned, this is why there's this engagement, and we will be more than happy to consider them and assess their feasibility, also to include them in the way that we do policymaking inside the Commission.
Thank you. Now, we'll start our final round of questions. And I will give the floor to the political groups in reverse order, starting with the ESN group.
Mr. Micallef, you mentioned the Trusted Flaggers and the Digital Service Act in glowing terms. In October, in Germany, the first so-called Trusted Flagger was announced. According to the Federal Network Agency, these Trusted Flaggers now should be able to get rid of and take down and destroy any texts or social media posts that incite hatred. It seems that there are no longer independent courts. There's a private court called Respect that is headed by people who've been trained in Cairo by Islamists. And this is being underwritten by the Digital Services Act. In your answer to the question of the committee, you pointed out correctly that freedom of expression is important and worthy of defending as a fundamental right. How do you defend the fact the speaker's cut off?
I don't know if there was a question there, but what I will tell you is that civil society has a huge role to play in our communities, in the way that we work inside the Union. We will always support civil society in their work, because they enrich our societies and provide very valuable contributions. In the context of the Digital Services Act, there are, and I know that there are a great many organizations that have built expertise on cyberbullying issues, that have knowledge on how to detect cyberbullying cases, and that knowledge could be very useful to be able to report and for the victims to be able to seek advice. I will definitely have an open door approach to work with civil society, and this is something that I will do so in this part of my portfolio as well as in other areas.
Mr. Papas.
Mr. Micallef, although in the European Parliament, with a resolution in the previous mandate, we saw that 2% of the budget should go to culture, but it is expected that funding in the next MFF will be drastically reduced, especially for the funds under your portfolio. How will you resist to these reductions? How will you make the most of Erasmus+, and what should this program be focused on mostly? Thank you.
When we speak about Erasmus+, this is one of the flagship and most known programs in our union. In fact, probably there is whoever is here in this room right now has either participated in this program or knows someone who has participated in Erasmus. Now, the Commission's commitment is clear. It's in the political guidelines, but it's also something that I have assurance of from my discussions with the designate Vice President for People and Skills, as well as with the designate Commissioner responsible for budget, that we will strengthen Erasmus+. This is a program that is envied by global partners, and we need to now look at how we can develop it to include, for example, vocational education in this, which is something that we look forward to. But there is also the youth strands of Erasmus+, which I will be responsible for, and the sports strands. Obviously, I will fight for stronger budgets in these areas. This is a discussion that will come next year when we'll have the proposals on the next MFF, proposals which will also depend on support of the co-legislators. So there is a role for Council and for Parliament in this discussion, and I hope to be able to count on this committee's support so that we reach on our goals together in this area.
Mr. Marquardt? Can some
no. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. Mr. Micallef, as streaming has become the primary way audiences access music, artists in Europe frequently report challenges around fair and inclusive compensation, opaque revenue structures, and limited control over how their works are promoted and monetized. The Copyright Directive aimed to address some of these issues by requiring transparency in how works are used and remunerated. Yet, implementation has varied significantly across member states, leaving many artists unable to verify or understand the breakdown of their earnings from platforms. Commissioner-designate, given these ongoing challenges, what specific measures would you propose to ensure a fair, inclusive, diverse and sustainable streaming ecosystem that truly supports the livelihoods of European artists while ensuring transparency from streaming platforms and algorithms? Thank you.
Look, we need robust frameworks that support our artists, robust frameworks that ensure that they are fairly compensated. The regulations and the provisions that we have in the Copyright Directive, in the Digital Services Act, in the AI Act are already a good basis. When it comes to implementation, this is an area where we will focus a lot of our efforts and our energy. Without effective implementation, our rules will remain on paper. As a Commission, we are duty-bound as guardians of the treaty, but also to engage with stakeholders, but also with member states where there are risks, where there are gaps in implementation. We will do it so in a structured way. We will engage, but at some points that engagement is not enough. So we have to use the tools at our disposal to be able to enforce our legislative framework. And if need be, we will not be afraid to use them. These are there, and we will do so. But there is also an ongoing assessment of the way the Digital Services Act and the Copyright Framework are interacting together. This will give us a basis, this assessment will give us a basis to determine if there are any other actions that will be needed in the periods to come.
Thank you. Mrs. Farron?
Désigné.
Commissioner designate, France, Italy, Spain and Germany have set up a cultural pass for young people which gives simpler access to cultural activities and events. Now, I must admit that I haven't really heard any major measures for culture until this point, and I'm a bit frustrated about it, so I wanted to know what your vision was in terms of making culture more accessible to young people so that people can have access to their heritage and get involved in activities, and also to ensure there's more cultural mobility in Europe? Thank you.
Look, in our political guidelines, it is very clear that we want to make culture and our rich and diverse cultural tapestry more accessible to young people, building on Discover EU. So Discover EU is a tool in Erasmus, in our Erasmus program, that I believe has been absolutely crucial in this sense. Through it, we have seen 1.4 million young people who have applied to visit Europe and visit our cultural heritage by train in a period of 30 days. And we have been able to accommodate 319,000 youths to be able to have this experience. Now, this is important because it gives youth the chance to learn about Europe and its cultural heritage. It gives them the opportunity to connect with their peers, to explore their European identity, as well as to develop their personal skills. And this is one of the concrete ways in which we can support young people in the next cycle of union programs, where we will have to work together with the designated vice president responsible for skills, as well as with the designated commissioner for budget, to ensure that we have adequate financing in Erasmus, but also in other areas of priority, notably in the culture sphere. We will need to see what we want to finance, how we will make our culture and creative sector industries more competitive, but also how to improve the working conditions of artists, and then decide how we want to finance it. But it is very clear in my mind that if we want to have an effective cultural compass, an impactful cultural compass, it has to be accompanied with adequate means, as well as with monitoring tools to ensure that we implement it effectively. Yeah?
Mr. Walcher.
Господин Micallef.
Mr. Micallef, Creative Europe program has an important role for the creative sectors in the European Union. It is vitally important for the less developed regions to be adequately funded. For us, it is also important to make sure for the creatives to express their ideas without being restricted by economic, ideological, or political pressure. Mr. Micallef, how can you ensure that all communities and minorities will access to culture so that we encourage diversity in all member states, and how would you the speaker was cut off, unfortunately.
We have a rich and diverse tapestry of cultural identities in the European Union. This requires that we support member states in ensuring that their culture sectors flourish, but as well as, at the same time, coordinating their efforts with strategic guidance. This coordination role is one which is very important. We have right now fragmented approach. There are multiple policies and multiple funding programs in our union that are tackling culture from different angles. So we really need to have something overarching, something that guides our cultural interventions in both funds and programs, as well as in our legislative work. When it comes to regions, this to me is one of our priorities, to provide strategic support and strategic action through which our regions can have access to culture. And this is an area where we will, first of all, have a consultation with our cultural and creative sectors in rural regions to understand the needs and concerns, and then also have events where, or a conference where we share our findings and discuss how we best tackle the issue of culture and regions.
Mrs. Krisi.
In your answers to the written questions from the Culture Committee, you specified that you would talk to the competent commissioner on the digital sphere. It's true that we're seeing European regulation that's being put in place preventing people in the realm of technologies from doing their job. The ChatGPT voice that can simulate a human, OpenAI is waiting to release this in Europe. Apple and others have delayed launching their AI businesses in Europe, saying the bureaucracy is too much, there's too much restriction. So rather than increasing red tape on digital freedoms, do you not think there should be a moratorium on AI and other technological developments so that our companies can benefit? Thank you.
We have ahead of us opportunities that are brought about by the digital transformation. Opportunities that bring with them the need to significantly transform these sectors, but also to manage the risks that they bring with them. Change is something that can be feared, but it is something that we have to embrace because we cannot become outdated. So I think the most important thing is that we find a balance. That we protect our competitiveness, that we protect our cultural and creative sectors in a way that is ethical and that it is fair, that they are reimbursed for their content and that their content is marked online. This is work that we have already made significant steps on in this mandate. So now it's something that we have to build on in the next mandate to ensure that we protect these sectors in the digital age.
Mrs. Rafovich.
Présidente, Monsieur le Commissaire désigné.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Designate, now before asking my question on Creative Europe, let me just express my disappointment and annoyance at what's been said here by the far right on the opening ceremony to the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris and this so-called LGBT ideology. I'm very proud that this opening ceremony showed our universal values. These are the values of Paris and Europe. Transphobia, homophobia, racism, sexism, none of that has a place in sport or culture. And it doesn't have a place in our parliament either. And I'd like to thank you, sir, for being so clear. Now, moving on to the Creative Europe programme. Now, the media part of that is more and more widespread. And would you welcome the fact that media goes back to DG instead of DG Connect as it was 10 years ago? And if that's the case, how do you intend to do that? Thank you.
The organization, the administrative organization, is not something that is within my prerogative. It's not within my control. What I will tell you is that in this current commission, all our portfolios are in some way, shape or form interlinked. There is not one policy area that's not in some way linked to another. If you take, for example, the youth, this is linked to education, it's linked to mental health, it's linked to equality, it's linked to many areas. If you take intergenerational fairness, I have already had the opportunity to mention how I see a link between this strategy and the work that we do on environment, on housing, on public finances, on employment. So it's absolutely crucial that we work as one, that we work in a coordinated way, that we collaborate together, that we also work as a team with Parliament, with stakeholders, with member states, and that together we make a Team Europe, a Team Europe that will ensure that we deliver on our common objectives of bettering and improving the quality of life of our citizens.
Mrs. Verheyen.
I will change to my mother tongue because we are the Committee for Multilingualism. In
each of the mission letters, it says we will strive to make Europe faster and simpler. In the Cult Committee, we looked at a report on the Erasmus Plus programme with youth, sport, Discover EU and education. We've examined all of that. We've examined the cultural strand and the Solidarity Corps. We noted that across the board we need to work on better inclusion and heavy whittling down of red tape. In addition, it's not clear how other programmes such as RFF, ERDF and so forth, how these programmes will come in. Where will the investments come to ensure access to these programmes? Because these programmes are just too unwieldy for small cultural organisations. They can't get their head around the red tape.
Simplification continues to be one of our priorities for the next period. I remember when I was a student at university, we had this Youth in Action initiative that we worked on. Apart from it being a great experience, I remember a couple of nights with my friends in students' house printing stacks this big of paper and queuing outside the National Agency's office to submit the application. Now, to me, this is exactly the reason why we must invest in simplification of our programs, because we want people to focus on the quality as well as on the delivery of the projects, while at the same time ensuring that we have robust regulatory framework. So it's about finding this balance. We have to find this balance also in Erasmus, but in other programs as well. We have to promote culture in all policy areas because it can really contribute to our regional policy. It can contribute to our social priorities. It can contribute to our education efforts. And the cultural compass is how we will do it. The cultural compass will be the general reference framework that I will use to work with my colleagues in the future college to ensure that we reach our shared objectives in the cultural sphere.
Thank you very much. Mr. Micallef, you now have the floor for 5 minutes for your concluding remarks.
Honourable Chair, honourable members, thank you for this opportunity for open discussion and dialogue today. This is European democracy at its best. I have come to deepen my understanding about your views for the coming mandate, about our vision for the future of the European Union. I trust that I have answered all your questions with clarity, openness, and commitment. Clarity, openness, and commitment I also intend to bring to the role of Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, Youth, Culture, and Sport. And the European values of diversity, fairness, solidarity, and democracy will guide my action. Major challenges stand before us. Major challenges that require bold responses, bold European responses. Conflict, inequality, and climate change are now all part of our political reality, and already have a direct impact on our lives. Our approach to intergenerational fairness, youth, culture and sport is central to Europe's responses to these challenges. The European Parliament has been a great ally to the EU's cultural policies, including Creative Europe programme and our support to Ukrainian cultural professionals. You have been a staunch supporter of young people, defending Erasmus Plus and promoting their inclusion in democratic decision-making. And you have championed our European sport model. If confirmed, I will work alongside you to further strengthen the cooperation between this House and the European Commission, and to defend the interests of current and future generations. To achieve this, I will establish regular communication with the members of relevant parliamentary committees. And in line with the political guidelines, I will provide an annual report on my progress in delivering on the promises which I have made to you today. Together, our institutions will ensure that Europe offers current and future generations the same opportunities to thrive and reach their ambitions. Together, we can ensure that young people's voices are not only heard, but listened to and acted upon. And together, we can further cultivate the power of culture and activate the power of sport. Art, music, literature, cinema and sport, amateur or professional, are central to Europe's unique cultural heritage. They hold us together and foster a shared sense of belonging, a shared sense of destiny as Europeans. If confirmed, I will endeavour to maximise the EU's impact in these areas, to bring added value to all Europeans in their daily lives, in every corner of our Union. Honourable members, thank you again for today's discussions and for the dialogue. I hope I have earned your trust to enable me to take forward the Commission's work in the fields of intergenerational fairness, youth, culture and sport. It would be a great honour and a privilege to work with you in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Micallef. And thank you all, dear members and dear chairs and vice chairs of the invited committee. I know 3 hours is quite a long time, but we had quite a fruitful discussion, and thank you also for the staff that actually made this meeting or this hearing possible. We'll proceed now, and if I may ask you just to say quiet for one last minute, to the evaluation of the Commissioner-designate, and I will ask the coordinators to meet in camera without undue delay. So thank you once again for your active participation. Have a nice evening.